Welcome back. You're listening to the panel discussion, Balancing the Need for Cybersecurity with the Desire for Innovation, sponsored by Leidos on federalnewsradio.com and 1500 AM. I'm your host, Jason Miller. My guests today are Angie Heisey, the Civil Group President for Leidos, Renee Wynn, the Chief Information Officer at NASA, and Captain Michael Dickey, the Commander of the U.S. Coast Guard's C4IT Service Center. Now, before break, we were talking about the mission area, the enterprise IT, how they're fitting together, how the communication is much better than it's probably been ever before. And then now we're going to bring up the one thing that usually stops that communication, unfortunately, still is cybersecurity. And you'd think after the breaches and the OPM breaches, the Target breach, the JP Morgan Chase breach, and we could, I think, go on and on and on, that people would get it. And I still believe, according to the people I speak with in the federal community and outside, is still the long pole in the tent. How do you get people to understand that cyber needs to be, as you said, built in from the beginning, not bolted on? So let me turn to Angie to start. When you have that discussion, when agencies are coming to you with RFPs and solicitations and customers are coming to you, is that connection being made between why there has to be that cyber piece with the mission piece, and they're not one or the other, but it's got to be both?
So I would say in general, yes, right? Our customers do understand that it needs to be. How it gets executed is very different based on different agencies, whether it's a commercial client or a federal client. But they all kind of struggle with the same thing. One is just educating everybody on what needs to happen. So, and I'll give you a few examples, whether it's mission software, right, that's being developed and you have to do secure coding techniques and you have to be in line with what requirements are needed out of the enterprise IT organization, or we spend a lot of time working with like operational technology. So it may be industrial control systems, right? Because all these systems now have significant amount of software built in. They need to be patched, they need to be updated, and a lot of times those technologies are run by a completely different group. And so being able to educate everyone about what the threats are, what the risks are, and how to best mitigate those is something that I think everyone's aware of. How you go about actually doing that education and then applying lessons learned and best practices holistically across the business is where most organizations, I think, are striving for, and at least trying to get to. I've had a recent conversation with a couple clients around like the NIST framework and trying to say, look, it's just a framework that doesn't really measure how effective you are. And so being able to have a clear understanding of where your current stance is and understanding your risk posture, and then having a roadmap that actually maps to where you want to get to is really important. And it's important for all those technologies that we just talked about, not just your email servers and your network.
I think in many ways when you talk about the developing mission software, that those, my perception is people get it, right? I mean, when you talk about SCADA systems or industrial control systems, I think that's still very new to many people in the cyber world and the coming together. Do they, if you will, the industrial control folks get that, well, this is connected to this, which is then connected to your network, which then is now part of the attack surface?
They do. I will tell you, certainly within the last couple of years, there's been some massive, very public instances around industrial control systems, so they are very aware, I think. And I'm seeing both commercial clients and federal clients attacking the problems a little bit differently than what they had been in the past. Whereas a lot of times the industrial control systems were very local. They are looking at it a little bit more at an enterprise level, so we can have common standards, maybe even deploy common tool sets and common practices across the board to ensure that they have a known risk profile for all those systems.
Captain Dickey, jump in real quick. When you work with the Coast Guard and say, okay, we have to get that email to that ship, and they say, well, we just need it. Just get me the email. Do you understand why? Okay, well, we have to delineate this is classified or unclassified, and then you also work in the environments where an email and something as simple as an email could put the ship at risk if they know if someone hacks into the email and says, oh, that ship's going to head in this direction at this time at this point. Talk a little bit about where cyber fits in for you guys.
Where cyber fits in for the Coast Guard, actually, we'll back up 2 years when the Commandant of the Coast Guard signed the Coast Guard Cyber Strategy. And we'd been working for a year or so to get to that point, but in June of 2015, the Commandant signed the cyber strategy. And there are 3 strategic priorities: defending cyberspace, enabling operations, and protecting infrastructure. So the last part, protecting infrastructure, is focused on the maritime critical infrastructure, those industrial control systems, SCADA systems in the port and vessel environment as part of the maritime transportation system. And the Coast Guard won't protect those, but we will definitely work, our captains of the port work with the facility operators and vessel operators on their cybersecurity. For the first part, defending cyberspace, our cyberspace, that's really focused on mission assurance. And so that's how we communicate the cybersecurity requirements to mission owners. Because the reason that we are applying cybersecurity controls, that we're applying rules, that we're locking things down, is not because we enjoy doing it, because it's a lot of work, but it's because that the end result of all of that is to provide better mission assurance for Coast Guard missions across the whole spectrum of our missions. And I think we've done well. We still have work to do in communicating to operators that email that you want to receive, or that port that you want opened up, or that website that you want to visit. You can't, because it opens up the entire Coast Guard enterprise to an unacceptable risk. And so it's all about managing risk, and I think we've done a good job of communicating that. We're going to continue to work on that over the upcoming years, though, because it's still a difficult conversation with operators who just want to get the job done.
Strategy is always the first step, right? I think, Angie, you said that. You got to have a strategy. The implementation of that strategy, would you say it's been, I know you're not at the lead, you're not at the tip of the spear of the implementation, but you see it from a service center perspective. Is it going okay? No, it's not. Make news, right?
That's right. It actually is.
Yeah.
Admiral Lunday, who's been in the job of our Assistant Commandant for C4IT for the last year, has been pushing the Coast Guard Cyber Program, which really is the ways and means to implement the Coast Guard strategy. And so he's got very good support from Coast Guard leadership. Establishing the Coast Guard's role in the maritime transportation system, but also internal to the Coast Guard, organizing for command and control of the cyberspace that we maintain, and developing a workforce and generating Coast Guard operating forces in cyberspace. And I know we're going to get into workforce a little bit later, but that's a huge part of our cyber strategy, and we are very focused on it.
Renee, you heard risk come up several times. NASA is the risk agency. If there's a model, NASA understands it. How are you communicating that risk side to the mission? Because they understand space risk. Launching a rocket into space that's a lot of risk. But cyber risk is something maybe that they're kind of like, I don't get that.
Yeah.
I think they do now. But.
Right, too. So actually, I'm really appreciated to get this question, because the way I like to do it, and in working with the current acting administrator, Robert Lightfoot, we both have the same view that this is all about enterprise risk. So every launch has its risks. There's always that nail-biting moment with each launch, even though we do it quite frequently nowadays, and as does SpaceX and others. And every time an airplane takes off and lands, there's a lot of risk associated with those events. But they're so commonplace now that we forget that part. So let's go up to the risk associated with the federal agencies. We have basically, as OMB has laid out for us, there's 5 swim lanes of risk, and I think they actually help tell the conversation in a common language way. There's operational risk. One squirrel can take out your uninterrupted power supply. Now you have no email, you've got no air conditioning, and you got a lot of grumpy people, right? So, and you took out all your IT as well with it, except your mobile devices that happen to be powered up, as some don't stay that way very well. So you have operational risk. With that, you have programmatic risk. If you are depending upon your software to execute commands and scripts on demand, like in a launch system, right, and if something goes awry, you're not going to have your program launched in order to gather data in space for science, for advancing science. There's strategic risk. I think a number of things we've seen in terms of not capitalizing and managing IT as a strategic resource is some businesses have put themselves out of business and not recognizing the strategic risk associated with capitalizing on what IT can bring to the table. Blockbuster, when was the last time you drove there? Was nailed by Netflix, right? Who anticipated this model? So not having that strategic direction and looking at your strategic assets, IT being one of them, allows it to didn't allow them to stay in the game. And then you've got financial risk. So cybersecurity plays in financial risk. You get a ransomware, you overpay for your software. Your software is used to attack you and 5 other people, right? Other businesses. Boy, now you're the skunk at the party. And then there's reputational risk. And this is a huge one. I love working at NASA, and we have a shiny meatball, as we call it. And that shiny meatball, you know, any mistake that we make can be viewed as reputational risk. But a cyber incident that either we caused or we had is a huge reputational risk. And so cybersecurity plays strongly in reputational risk, financial risk, and certainly in operational risk. And so if we look at it as an enterprise issue, any strong leader will know that you have to capitalize and think of IT as a strategic resource. You got to make sure you have the people in place, you have the process in place to help you make it go really well, and then you've got to have the tools to help you do that. And the final thing I'd close on is that cybersecurity needs to be moving from compliance, FISMA driven, to absolute resilience. It is not if you're going to have an attack or if you're going to lose power. Any lightning strike will tell you that one, right? It's when you're going to do it, and can you recover, and how quickly can you recover, and are you getting the email to the men and women at arms in fast enough fashion in order to protect them or protect this nation?
Angie, jump in.
Yeah, so I think Renee's position on risk is a fantastic example of where organizations really need to focus. They need to understand what is acceptable risk for their enterprises. And just in the last year, I've seen more organizations actually have that dialogue and discussion because they recognize that they don't have endless budgets, right, to be able to get to a low risk posture from a cybersecurity. I have done a lot of business with a lot of customers, and I haven't seen the ability to be able to make that such a significant investment. And so making a deliberate and conscious decision of what their risk acceptance is in those different areas, and then ensuring that their roadmaps that Captain spoke about actually match up to ensure that they get to that risk posture for each of those areas is critically important. And I think previously there was an acceptance of not being able to manage that risk as well as what I think we are able to today and have been able to over the last couple of years.
Captain Dickey.
That's absolutely a focus for the Coast Guard as well. In fact, part of the Coast Guard cyber program now is focused on what Admiral Lunde has called appropriately our command control computers, communication, cyber, and intelligence mission.
C4ITSRY.
C5I.
C5I, thank you.
Mission, enterprise mission platform. And why that's important is for the first time ever, we are talking in the Coast Guard about our IT infrastructure as a strategic asset, and it's this enterprise mission platform that all of our missions depend on. It is a strategic resource, and we're treating it as such, and we realize that we can't take our risks down to zero. In fact, we probably can't even get to the point where we have a comfortable low risk, but what we are working on is building the capability to manage that risk so that we understand what the risk is and we can make informed risk decisions.
A couple times during our conversation, workforce has come up. Let me jump over there for a second. One of the challenges is not just around cybersecurity, but can you hire the right cyber people, but also can you get others who are non-quote-unquote cyber people to understand the challenges of cyber. Renee, let me just start with you. How are you guys doing on both those sides of the coin?
I would break it down into a couple of buckets in this. And the first one is keeping humans aware that this could happen. And it's just what NASA does in terms of safety, is having the posters up, having the leadership or the managers or even individuals saying, you know, are we doing the right thing? Are we taking the right precautions to keep our people safe? And in the same instance, we need to do the same thing when we're using our computers. Are we keeping our information and our network safe, because those are strategic resources? So you've got to keep the awareness up. But it can't be the same poster, because we'll probably all walk by that same pile in our house for 2 years before we realize it even needs to have anything done to it. So we'll go first for the awareness of the workforce and the contractor workforce that are our strong partners. And then there's staying current, keeping current with our current workforce. And then I would say the third bucket is a very strong partnership with our colleagues in the contractor workforce, because we will not do this alone. Bringing the innovation in terms of cybersecurity and resilience with our networks or with anything that we do becomes really critically important. And in that partnership, if we find a weakness maybe within our workforce, then we can augment it by buying it, and then you can look at how you want to spend your money. You also want to really largely hire a curious workforce, because cyber is not standing still. IT is certainly not standing still, and so you don't want a workforce that goes, I love pushing this red button, right? You know, no. We want you to push the red button, the pink button, and maybe even decide that there's an order change in pushing those buttons that you want to do. And so hiring a curious workforce, and you doing your part as a supervisor or a leader, and ensuring that they can apply that curiosity and towards cyber or other areas, and then bring that to the workspace. And so I would really break it up to educating and awareness, no matter who walks in your building, us and the work, you know, federal employees as well as the contractors. There's the hiring curious individuals, because sometimes you can't get the talent, but you can create some of it. Yeah. And then augmenting the talent with the contractor workforce and having a really strong partnership, collaborative partnership is where I would go with that.
Well, I want to take a quick break. When we come back, Angie, I'm going to throw it to you around that workforce piece of the playoff, maybe what Renee said. But first, we'll take a break. You're listening to the panel discussion, Balancing the Need for Cybersecurity with the Desire for Innovation, sponsored by Leidos on federalnewsradio.com at 1500 AM.